The purpose of this video is to give you a little bit of help with Lesson 5.06, Genotypes and Phenotypes. So let's get started. The first thing we need to talk about is some vocabulary words that are important. The word alleles are the corresponding pairs of genes located on an individual's chromosomes. Together, alleles determine the genotype of an individual. Genotype describes the specific genetic makeup of an individual. A person's genotype tells us exactly what alleles or genes they have. You cannot see someone's genotype. A phenotype, on the other hand, are the observable traits of an individual which the individual's genes or alleles have expressed. An analogy of genotype and phenotype would be writing computer code for a video game. The letters and the numbers and the symbols that you type in to write the code are kind of like the genotype. And the phenotype would be what the video game actually looks like on the computer screen when you're playing it. Humans' genetic code is very similar. We have genotype, which is the code for each trait, and then the phenotype is what physically we look like based on the genetic code or the genotype. So let's look at some phenotypes. The first image shows a widow's peak, and this is referring to the hairline on your forehead. If it dips down into a peak, that we say that you have a widow's peak. And if your forehead is smooth at your hairline, we say that you don't have a widow's peak. The second image is showing an attached earlobe, where someone's ear goes directly into their face. People either have a phenotype for an attached earlobe, like shown in the picture, or if their earlobe hangs free, we say that they have an unattached earlobe. So now let's talk about genotypes. Did you notice those letters above each of the picture? Those are the individual's genotype, and they represent the genes or alleles that determine the observable trait, which is the phenotype in the picture. Alleles always come in pairs. So when you look at the genotype, you'll always see a pair of letters. And you may wonder why they're in pairs. And that's because one of the genes comes from the mother and one of the genes comes from the father. You also may notice that some of the letters are uppercase and some of the letters are lowercase. Well, I wonder why that is. Good question. So let's find out. The letters are shown, they're showing you uppercase or lowercase. The uppercase letters are noting traits that are dominant. The lowercase letters are showing you a recessive gene for a particular trait. So if you have the code uppercase W, it's going to result in a phenotype for having the widow's peak. Here's an analogy I came up with about with colored paper. If I have a blue piece of paper, it's like having a dominant trait, and if I have another blue piece of paper, it's like having a dominant trait also. If I stack them together, what I would still see is the blue piece of paper or the genotype capital W, and it results in the phenotype or the expression. What you see is a blue piece of paper. In the next example, they show you a genotype uppercase W, lowercase w. The uppercase W is showing you the dominant gene. The lowercase w is showing you the recessive gene. So when we have the code uppercase, lowercase, we are still going to see the dominant trait of a widow's peak. That's because whenever you have the dominant gene present, you will see it. With my paper analogy, it's kind of like having the dominant blue piece of paper and a recessive or a clear piece of paper. If I stack a clear piece of paper on top of the colored blue paper, what you still see is the blue color shine through. So here the genotype would be capital W, lowercase w, and the phenotype of what you see is still the blue piece of paper or the dominant trait. The last example is showing you two recessive genes. So here we have a lowercase w, and the result of that code is having no widow's peak, or the recessive trait, which is having no widow's peak. And When two recessive alleles are present, the recessive trait is what you see. With the paper analogy, it's like having a clear piece of paper and a clear piece of paper, both recessive. That's the only time that you get to see a recessive trait, is where you have the genotype recessive, recessive, or lowercase, lowercase. I hope that clears up some confusion and gave you a little bit of